Okay, I want to build on what my great colleague Natalie Blay talked about with rural communities. This is not going to come as a surprise to you. And I want to talk about minimum aid districts. So I see that as a continuum of rural schools. Amherst and Northampton, for example, are not rural per se, but they are minimum aid. 211 of the 318 districts in our Commonwealth are minimum aid districts. That's a pretty shocking number, right? 211 out of 318. I believe that's the correct number. Bob or Tom will tell me if I'm wrong, maybe, but that's a pretty significant number of minimum aid districts. Amherst, the town of Amherst, over the last 15 years has seen a 1% increase in minimum aid. 15 years, 1%. That is clearly not keeping pace with inflation. And, you know, when regional school transportation numbers fluctuate and in this year perhaps dip, it's a collision of epic proportion. Northampton, the superintendent of the city of Northampton is going to speak later. They're looking at cutting many teachers in Northampton. So we are, and Secretary, you said it perfectly, I think. It's, you know, Chapter 70 was not handed down from the divine. It is an imperfect formula. And I would suggest, with every ounce of respect I can muster, that it must be reopened. We must look at Chapter 70. I know everybody's heads are going to explode in the back, but we must look at Chapter 70 for the minimum aid districts because we are, I think, looking at a declining spiral in districts that I represent, not only the rural districts, and that is a particular bucket of need. And I agree with Rep. Blay, 15 million is not 60 million. And by the time we get to 60 million, it's really going to be 100 million. So we are falling behind. We are not serving a majority of districts. Now, I know that perhaps Tom and Bob would tell me that of those districts that are not minimum aid, that they're serving the majority of the Commonwealth's kids. And I get that, right? I get that these are the smaller schools and serving a smaller percentage of the population, even though it's 211 districts. And so that plus, or the minimum aid combined with the mass health redetermination that's shaking off some low income students. Athol Royalston, for example, is going to see a big dip because of that. And then combined with the inflator that we are subject to, I know in law, is creating a great deal of pain in Western Massachusetts. So I would say, what can we do? Can we relook at this formula? Can we crack it open and look at the way in which it should serve 351 cities and towns equitably, but it simply is not. And what more can we do?
So I'm going to take all of what you said and things, as you mentioned in the outset, that I have heard because I listened.
I know you have, and you listen deeply, and you've said you're on a journey. So I do know that. You know, I know you think it's not static and it is not a divine formula.
But it's not. But what I would say is I hear that pain and I see and read about the impact. I'm willing to follow the legislature on this. If this is something that it decides or determines is an appropriate next step, then we're willing to sit down at the table and have the conversation and be a partner in that effort.
So you're thinking it would require statute to do that, or could it be a working group, an administration, legislature working group that could really crack open everything? Last year at this hearing, we talked a lot about combined effort yield and the 82.5% cap. I was going at it from a different way. And Bill Bell has certainly talked to me about this over time. You know, so I'm tackling it from a minimum aid, you know, mass health redetermination tact, but really it's a big bucket of inputs that how much communities are supposed to pay, how much they get, and the collision for our communities. Rep. Blay mentioned the levy limit. Many of our communities are going to hit it, and then we're really going to see pain. Could we do a working group?
If the legislature has an appetite for a working group, we would be willing partners.
I think that's a beautiful offer. Okay. Certainly, you know, I can't speak for the legislature,
Right.
but it's beautiful to hear that you are willing to come to the table in that way. I know you've been listening. I know in 1 year you've done tremendous work.
Mhm.
That is without question.
Thank you.
I think it's just that we're going to a cliff here that we won't be able to come back from,
Mhm.
and I think we will see true harm
Mhm.
in our local communities. True harm. So I appreciate you taking
A
that in.
pleasure.
I do very
Thank you.
much.